Here's a thought on the Penn State game, which one of you sent a question about. The mailbag questions have been on fire for the last couple of weeks in particular. YouTube comments, become a Locked On Ducks insider, Twitter, always get in the mailbag. If you're an insider, you get priority mailbag access and a bunch of other perks as well. Link in the description below for a free 14-day trial. With Allen and Singleton returning for Penn State, that's their running backs, I think they rely heavy on the run this year. Zach Sako of Locked On Any Lines agrees. I know they've made key additions to their offense, but I don't trust that Aller is comfortable being forced into a heavy passing attack. I also don't know if their O-line stacks up with Oregon's defensive line and that this is a defensive decided game. And Mateo, along with the rest of the front, limits the run, forcing Aller to pass more than he'd like, and Oregon can walk out of Happy Valley with a defensive win in the range of 17-10. So, the thought about the Penn State game I hadn't considered previously isn't what you're alluding to here. It's actually something that Ryan Herrings of Locked On Badgers talked about over on our Locked On Big Ten squad today, which are a ton of fun. Go check them out where it'll show up right in this feed, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on podcast. He pointed out that Penn State is indeed at home off a bye when they play Oregon. Their non-conference schedule is a joke. It's Indiana level bad. So they won't have played for a couple weeks, so they'll be well rested, but they will not have been seriously pushed or challenged. They're favored, I think, in their first game by something around 45 points. That could be the line for all of their non-conference games. It's an incredibly weak schedule before they play Oregon. And you contrast that to the Ducks. I'm not saying Oregon is going through a murderer's row here, but Penn State is playing Nevada, FIU, and Villanova. Oregon is playing Montana State and FCS, just like Villanova is, Oklahoma State, a Power 4, Oregon State in a rivalry game, and Northwestern. Northwestern comes before Oregon State. So the Ducks will be fresh off a game where a team that doesn't have as much talent as them, but is still respectable, solid, should be a bowl team this year in Oregon State, is going to give them their very best punch because they would love nothing more than to get a win over the Ducks. It'd be a landmark victory for Trent Bray in his tenure going into his second season taking over for Jonathan Smith. And all of a sudden, I just looked at this game and thought, wow, I hadn't considered that. So it's a scheduling advantage for Penn State. They're at home off a bye, long trip for Oregon, who's playing consecutive game number 5. But the battle-tested part, I'm not kidding, it gave me a little bit more confidence. I've said all offseason, I expect Oregon to lose that game. They're a 4.5-point underdog, according to our friends at FanDuel. I put the shoe mentally on the other foot in my head and thought, how would I feel if Oregon had played 3 really easy games, took a week off, and then had Penn State come to them? I could very easily, if I was being a negative Nelly, talk myself into this is a horrible place for Oregon to be. Maybe they come out of the gate sluggish, but Penn State will have their home crowd and a whiteout behind them, so I'm not necessarily anticipating that. But if Oregon physically can go and throw the first punch in that game, like think Utah 2023, on the Ducks versus them after that one, which was College Game Day, Dan Lanning said, if they win the toss, I hope they give us the ball. If we win the toss, we are going to take the ball. I want the ball first. I want to go into that stadium, and I want to silence the crowd, march right down the field, and they marched right down the field, including with a play that they called Train Right March, which is just a bunch on the end line of the line of scrimmage. You pulled 2 tight ends around to lead for Bucky Irving, who got down to the 1-yard line, and then Bo Nix ran it in. Not that I remember weird things, but anyway. So that game went very well. Oregon was a 6.5-point favorite, and they won by a lot. It was like 35-6, I think it was. So just consider that angle. Let me know what you think about that, because I hadn't had that thought before. Back to your question, though, about Penn State. I totally agree. They're going to be a run-first team. You know, they remind me a lot of Michigan from 2 years ago. J.J. McCarthy was drafted in the first round, as Drew Aller will be, because of his physical traits, not necessarily his production. Aller's 6'5", moves and has a humongous arm. He can make special throws. He'll get taken in the first round. J.J. McCarthy didn't have incredible numbers. He had 22 touchdowns and 5 picks his last year at Michigan, and they ran the ball with great backs. I think they'll do that. Where I disagree with you is that Penn State's O-line doesn't stack up to Oregon's defensive line, because we saw in the Big Ten championship game, and Penn State returns 3 or 4 starters from that unit, Oregon's D-line is going to be really good. But when you don't have Jamari Caldwell or Derek Harmon or Jordan Birch, they will have had time to settle into their rotations and whatnot. But overall, Oregon's defensive line, I think, is the best unit on this team. I don't think it's quite as good as last year. And Penn State, with Andy Kotelnicki, their offense coordinator, being incredibly clever and creative and calling the right stuff at the right time, they ran all over Oregon. Drew Aller didn't have a huge game, and Penn State scored 37 points. Why? Because they ran the football up and down the field. So I do think run defense is paramount. That'll probably be one of my top keys for the Penn State game when Oregon goes there on September 27th. But a defensively sided game, could it be a slugfest? I mean, we haven't seen Oregon win a big slugfest game in the Dan Lanning era. You think of the biggest wins, it was the blowout I mentioned against Utah, Ohio State 32-31, Penn State 45-37. That doesn't mean that Dan Lanning isn't, doing his job as a former defensive coordinator and now head coach, because that's the way the game goes sometimes, and the object is to win no matter how it looks. But Utah 2022, when Bo Nix was hobbled, final score of that game was, I think, 17-10. 14? Let me look at that real quick. Utah, Oregon football 2022 was 2017. Yeah, that's like the lowest scoring, high profile game that Oregon has had. And when you're in that environment, Penn State's going to have a really good defense. Jim Knowles is a brilliant defensive coordinator. I think it's more likely both teams are kind of in the 20s, maybe 30 range or so, just because there's so much talent there. But would it be interesting to see, an Oregon-Penn State game that is 17-10? Yeah, and I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility with how these teams play and what their personnel are top to bottom. So, yeah, I think that a couple of different interesting ways to look at that Penn State game this year. Nick sent this one in. Under the radar breakout candidate, Jamari Johnson. With Sadiq being used all over the field, Johnson produces in the more traditional tight end role and matches Sadiq's numbers from last year with 24 catches for 308 yards. So T-Ferg had just under 600 yards last year, I'm pretty sure, and Sadiq was in that 300-yard range. So I don't know if they're going to be, I think Johnson will see the field a really hefty amount. Yeah, 591 and 3 touchdowns for Terrence Ferguson. Remember how long it took for a tight end to score a touchdown? That was a fun, tiny storyline. That's how good Oregon was last year, that was a legit talking point. When's a tight end going to score a touchdown? First world problem. That's the highest class society problems there in a football standpoint. But Johnson's got real potential. He's coming off an injury last year, coming over from Louisville. Oregon's number 2 tight ends have been involved. You'd have to define breakout candidate for me specifically if you want to go for a guy that is going to have the best statistical season of his career. I could definitely see it. Johnson at Louisville last year, 13 catches in 7 games for 158 yards and a touchdown. He could definitely go over that. So if that's your definition of breakout candidate, I'll put a 7.5 for Spencer scale of agreement that he breaks out and gets over 200 yards, just because no matter who the tight end has been, Terrence Ferguson, a second-round tight end, and there was still a tight end over 300 yards a year ago. They just use multiple tight ends in their passing offense a lot, in the screen game or otherwise, and Sadiq is very unique. And so, you can put 2 on the field, but line up Kenyon and all the way out wide if you want to, or put him in the slot. You could literally put him, you could put Kenyon Sadiq anywhere on the field, which is really cool. So, yeah, I think Johnson can get over 300 yards on the season. Maybe he catches a couple touchdowns. He's a big-bodied guy, 6'5", not athletic like Sadiq, but, I mean, who is at the tight end position? Answer is really nobody there. So, yeah, it's a good under-the-radar breakout candidate. Keep submitting those. I like that question I put out there recently. I'm going to get to some more on tomorrow's show that one of you submitted. Another question that came from a Locked On Ducks insider that is legitimately one of the toughest questions I have ever had to answer on the show. I was asked what my favorite Oregon regular season victory is of all time. Oh man, let's debate that in the comments. I mean, ones that come to mind: 2009 USC, 2021 Ohio State, 2018 Washington, 2010 Oregon State to clinch berth in the national championship game, 2010 Stanford, 2010 Tennessee is up there. Man, 2014 Michigan State at home, Efo's pick, Mariota's flip to Freeman on 3rd and 11. A lot of good stuff there. I think because of what it signified, I am going to go with 2009 USC. You know, that was a changing of the guard. Chip Kelly, who is now Pete Carroll's offensive coordinator in the NFL, if you can believe that with the Raiders, ran Pete Carroll out of the Pac-10, and Brent Musburger correctly declared there's a new king in the Pac-10 because Oregon went for 600 yards of offense on USC's defense, and that just didn't happen. So, yeah, and I remember watching that with my friends Halloween night. My brother and a buddy were at that game. So I'm going 2009 USC. There are a lot of good options. Drop yours in the comments below.